Now, from the White House, joining me is John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council. Admiral Kirby, it is great to see you. Thank you for being with me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Glad to be here.
I want to talk about those holdouts, those Republican holdouts. As you know, a growing number of them saying, hold on a minute, we can't just be writing a blank check, including Senator J.D. Vance, who said this in a letter to OMB, quote, how do you, based on the information you're getting, how do you think the counteroffensive is going? And are the Ukrainians closer to victory than they were 6 months ago? Based on this letter that we're getting from OMB, let me just, from J.D. Vance, I should say, can you just answer some of these questions? Do you think that Ukrainians are any closer to victory than they were 6 months ago? Is the counteroffensive any more effective than it was when it started?
Well, it's a shame that the senator didn't take advantage of the opportunity to listen to President Zelenskyy himself today, who I am absolutely certain was updating members of Congress about progress on the battlefield. But let me take a shot at it, because we obviously monitor as best we can. The truth is that the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly in the south, are making steady progress. Now, is it as far or as fast as they want to go coming out of Zaporizhia towards the coast of the Sea of Azov? No. And they'd be the first to tell you that. I'm sure President Zelenskyy shared that perspective. The Russians had months to dig entrenchments, what we call defense in depth. They have literally put up tens of thousands of mines and minefields all across that southern expanse to try to slow the Ukrainians down, and it has certainly had an effect on them. But they are making progress, and one of the reasons they're making progress, first of all, it's obviously because of their skill and bravery and the fact that they're allocating resources to this advance, but is because of the tools, the training, and the technology that the United States and our allies and partners have lent them, have given them, have provided them to be able to make that progress. So look, we always knew this was going to be a tough slog, Kristen. It's hard to be perfectly predictive. It has proven to be violent, and it has proven to be tough going. But the Ukrainians are making progress, and they should be commended for that.
Well, one of the points that J.D. Vance raises is that it's not clear what the exit strategy is. So can you speak to that point, to that concern? What's the strategy? What's the exit plan here for the U.S.?
Well, again, I'm not exactly clear what the senator's referring to. Normally, when you talk about exit strategy, you're talking about getting American troops out of a war zone, that kind of thing. It's important to remember that we don't have American troops in Ukraine. Ukrainians are on their soil, and they're fighting for every inch of it. So I don't think they plan on going anywhere.
Military aid. We are providing the military aid and obviously financial aid.
They aren't planning on going anywhere. And the United States is committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes to succeed on the battlefield. So if by exit strategy he's talking about an end of the war, I'd offer this. Mr. Putin could end it today if he just pulled his troops out of Ukraine where they don't belong. That probably isn't going to happen. The Ukrainians want this to end immediately, and we all want to see this war end. But it's got to end on terms that President Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people can accept. Their country has been invaded. Imagine how Americans would react if it was on our soil. They want Russian forces out of their soil. We want to help them succeed on the battlefield so that if and when President Zelenskyy, and only President Zelenskyy, can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin, that he can sit down and have a diplomatic dialogue with the wind at his back and with some strength.
Are you satisfied, is the administration satisfied, Admiral, with the level of accountability that you have seen from Ukraine, effectively how the weapons are being used?
We are constantly working with the Ukrainians on the issue of oversight, and we have staffed up the embassy in Kyiv with additional folks from the Department of Defense to help the Ukrainians with improving oversight and accountability. So we all recognize that there's a desire for that. We've shared that desire from the very beginning because we know this is expensive material, and we want to make sure that it's being used appropriately. Once it gets into Ukraine, it is going into a war zone. It belongs to the Ukrainians. That's point number one. And number two, it's being used in a war, and war is unpredictable. And so the idea that every single bullet can be perfectly accounted for, I think, is an extreme concern here. But we obviously do share the concerns of members of Congress about accountability, and we are working very hard with Ukraine to that end.
And Admiral, what's the strategy to deal with waning support, not just here in the U.S., but globally? Obviously, the president just left the G20 summit, which couldn't agree on language condemning Russia. How do you continue to keep people engaged in this fight?
We got to keep getting him exposed to President Zelenskyy and letting him, he's the best messenger, letting him have an opportunity like he had today on Capitol Hill to explain what they're doing and why it matters to them. But also, the president's not missing any opportunities to talk about Ukraine in a full-throated way and defending what we're trying to do and why it matters. And you heard that on Tuesday at his speech at the UN General Assembly, a very, very comprehensive discussion about why this war matters. And the president said it's not just, although first and foremost it is, about Ukrainians and Ukrainian sovereignty. It is about the message it sends to Putin and would-be aggressors if we just walk away. If we just let him have Ukraine, Kristen, which is what he still wants. He doesn't believe they ought to exist as a nation state. If we just let him have it, where does it stop? He'll be right up on the eastern flank of NATO. And if you think that the cost of supporting Ukraine is high right now, imagine how much higher that cost is going to be in blood and treasure to the United States if, in fact, Mr. Putin is emboldened and wants to go after a NATO country or some other would-be aggressor is willing to start another war somewhere.
Let me move on to yesterday's bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. Obviously, they discussed this potential deal which would normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, Mr. Netanyahu is saying the countries could forge what's called he's calling an historic peace. How close are all sides to a deal? Because it's my understanding there are some key sticking points.
In any major set of negotiations, there's going to be sticking points, and you're going to have to work through them. And our diplomats, they're working on this very hard. We think that a more integrated Israel to the region is good. It's good for the region. It's good for the Israeli people. It's good for our national security interests. We want to see normalization proceed. We also recognize that the two big parties here are the parties in question, Saudi Arabia and Israel, and they have to make these sovereign decisions for themselves. We understand that. But we are talking to all parties to see if there's some negotiation that can be had. I can tell you we're working at it very, very aggressively, but I'm unable to give you like a timeline or sort of where that sits on the calendar. All I can tell you is that we believe this is in everybody's best interest to move forward to normalization.
Just to pin you down a little bit, are you optimistic there will be a deal ultimately?
I am optimistic that that everybody sees the benefits, and I mean all parties, not just us, that all parties see the benefit in some potential move towards normalization. But again, I don't, nothing's done until it's all done, and I don't want to get ahead of where we are in the process.
Very quickly, it would arguably isolate Iran, but it doesn't deal directly with their nuclear program, which has been advancing in recent years after the Iran nuclear deal was ripped up. So how do you address that part of that crisis in the region?
Look, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would send a powerful signal to the mullahs in Iran about how much further isolated they are and could potentially lead to increased pressure on Iran. Nobody's turning a blind eye to their destabilizing behavior, including their nuclear ambitions. And as President Biden has said, we are not going to allow Iran to achieve a nuclear weapon capability. We'd prefer to do that through diplomacy, but that diplomacy right now is moribund, Kristen, because they have not, the Iranians have not negotiated in good faith. They started larding up the talks with all kinds of things that didn't matter to the nuclear program. So it's a moribund process right now. We got to make sure, and we have, that the president has additional options available to him to make sure that we can't allow Iran to ever achieve a nuclear weapon.
All right, John Kirby, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.